Hi there, welcome to my workshop. Basically, I'm going to crack on and make this commission I've got, which is reproduction of Coppergate find or catalogue number 2811, seax, probably 9th, 10th century. But the reason I've got you in here is because I'm really bad at talking about Ledall. So I'm going to crack on and do this. I'll explain what I'm doing as I'm going through. And I'm going to talk a bit about Ledall while I'm working, because it seems a bit easier than setting up different times. So first of all, I've already drilled my slot in my piece of wood. This is a piece of cedar, if I remember correctly. It's been in the workshop for a long time, so I'm not entirely sure. I've already drilled through. I've done a bit of a burn through as well, hence nasty, horrible black marks. And that's the sap running down from when the it's put on. I just need to open it up. I'm going to put in a bolster in here anyway, but I just need to clean out some of the soot so that it fits a bit better. Yeah, nice little job with needle files. So Ledall. Ledall is, well, its official title is British Library's Additional Manuscript 39564, but that's quite a mouthful. And it is signed part of the way through the document as by a J. Ledall. It's actually signed Ahmed. I can't remember the exact wording, but it basically means written by, copied by, or translated by J. Ledall. So we don't know whether this is the original manuscript, or whether this is a copy of another manuscript, or whether it's a translation into English from another manuscript, because the manuscript is in English, for those who don't know. So where do we start? We know it's British Library number. We call it the Ledall roll because it's a roll. It's a vellum roll, 24 inches long, 6.5 inches wide, with handwritten text in a normal script. It's not in calligraphy or anything like that. This is just something somebody has written down. I think if I remember correctly, there are 233 lines of text. There are no pictures. There is no glossa explaining what any of the terms mean. And if you've not come across it or a transcription of it, it is just lists, combinations of techniques. So there are, I've got to remember all the numbers now. It's a while since I've actually really done much on it, but I thought I'd better get some information out there. There are 13 chases, there are 24 counters, 3 named plays, which kind of match up with the counters to some extent, but they don't fit within these 2 blocks. And then there are 2 flourishes as well. Period wise, quite difficult to say really. I'm not an expert on handwriting, but I've looked through, and to me it looks more like early to mid 16th century, 1530s, 1540s, rather than earlier. But one of the interesting bits, well, that's that. Where we go next is kind of trying to figure out, yeah, that's going to work, whether it's a translation or a copy or a transcription. It's quite hard to sort of define which one it's going to be. When we look at the plays, so they're broken down. It starts with the first 2 flourishes, then it has one of these named plays, then it has the 13 chases, and then it has the counters, and then it has 2 more named plays. On top of that, I can't remember exactly which way it is, but I think the counters go 1, 2, 3, 4, 22, 21, 22, 23, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then continue through. So it instantly, just on that superficial level, looks like there's potentially a transcription error, a copying error. So I think we can say that it is going to be either a translation or a copy rather than an original document in itself. and that's sort of backed up by other stuff. The fact that his signature is halfway through, well, not halfway through, it's towards the end, but it isn't at the end of the document. So what you can almost literally sort of see that he thinks he's finished. I made a quad, that's what it says. I made a quad, J Ledall, and then he's gone off, thinks he's finished and realised he's missed some bits. In the same way that you've got this transcription area where he's 1, 2, 3, 4, 21, 22, 23, 5. He's, you know, the players don't follow on. 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5 would follow on. So, in terms of how they're structured, it's very much working on the basics of his proffer rate quarter, which we'll get into another time and later. Right, I'm going to stand up now because I can't do this bit set down, and I'm hoping like hell I just stay in the camera shot because I haven't really thought about this. I just figured I'd basically invite you a cup of tea in the workshop while I do some work. We'll have a chat. So that becomes the next bit, yeah. So there's this obvious bit where it's obviously some sort of transcription, whether that's a translation as part of the transcription or whether it's just a thing on its own, is sort of difficult to ascertain. But there are some other points as well that give us some clues to the fact that it really does look like the guy copying it doesn't understand what he's seeing, realistically, because we've got this. We then hit another point where I think it's once we get into play counters 13, 14, 15. When we look at the original document, yeah, Bladesmith's going to be really pissed off with me just jamming this in the vise so I get a better grip on here. But it's only wood on steel and it should be made well enough to handle it. So plates, yeah, 13. So before we go there, each of these things are broken down. So there's the chases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're literally numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and each one has a paragraph attached to it. And in that paragraph are a series of plates. Now we come to these counters, 13, 14, 15, and what we start to see is, for a start, in one of these, there's actually 2 paragraphs. It's the only one in there that has these 2 paragraphs in there, and the titles don't match up to the thing. So the titles, some of them are just very simple, you know. Was it the first chase or the first counter? It doesn't necessarily come in with much detailed information on what's going on. So, but what's going on inside you? The 3. There's a chase, you know, the X chase, the 3 points of counter, and there are 3 different techniques within that show you for striking at 3 different targets. When we come to these counters, the 13, 14, 15, one with a double paragraph, or the last one with a double paragraph, in fact, the counter, the name doesn't match up with what's going on within the text. But if we look, it does match what's going on previously. So again, we've got this, you can rearrange them and then you end up with this named place. So there are actually 24 counters, not 23. So we can tell from there. So we've definitely got a copy of a document made by a man who didn't know what was going on in it. Now that doesn't mean he couldn't speak, well, it could mean, certainly once you get into the late 15th century and things, or in the medieval period, there are people who are copyists. They can copy the shapes of the letters on a book and copy them onto another parchment. Doesn't mean you can read what's going on. So we may have something like that, and we've got an even, I've got the date completely wrong, and it's not early 16th century. so not early 16th century. But I think we probably have. I mean, it could be that he was translating it and didn't realise that he was making the mistakes until later. It could be that he was just copying it and didn't realise he was making mistakes until later. But that's the basics of the manual. And what it is. So it's definitely a transcription. I don't think there's any denying that. There's mistakes in it, and obviously vellum is an expensive material in the period. So you can't just ignore, move on because you've made a mistake and get a new piece. You do your best to use it. And it has maximised the use of the material in writing it. If you ever see a copy of the original, unfortunately the British Library have quite strict copyright rules, so I'm not allowed to share it with you. But it's really tightly packed, to the extent that you'll end up with one play written through. He'll finish part of the way along the line at the bottom of that play, and he'll just put the title of the next one directly next to it, so he's not jumping down to create a new paragraph necessarily, though sometimes he does. So that's basically what the manual is. I don't think there's much else to basically said. I suppose we can look at who's the manual for. Not a clue, realistically. There is no mention of anything. There's just these lists of techniques with no glossar. And if you've looked at the transcriptions, you'll know the words that are used in it are pretty common everyday words that we use now. Not always, there are a couple in there. Foyne isn't something most people are familiar with now, which is just a thrust. And this is one, actually, while we're on there, remember, this is one of the reasons I think it may be early 16th century in terms of at least the copy. Is foyne is a medieval word to mean thrust. And he uses that word quite a bit in the manuscript. But he also uses the word thrust. So you can thrust forth a foyne. Or do things which are a back thrust. So he's obviously using this word interchangeably. For me, that does kind of suggest that possibly what we've got is that he's copying an old manuscript by their standards. And that it's using lots of old and medieval terms that he's familiar with. And sometimes he translates them, and sometimes he doesn't. Doesn't really help, but he gets us somewhere. But there is no preamble, there's no description of who it's designed for. I mean, the Harleian manuscript at least mentions that it's a fight between two bucklers, or two fighters, for the two-handed sword. Ledall doesn't mention a sword, he doesn't mention whether these are solo drills, or whether these are plays from a lesson, or anything basically. So we're kind of left a bit stuck on what they are and what they're about. That said, a flourish is known. Other people, Matt Gallis did some research, and we kind of know that a flourish is a solo form. Sometimes these solo forms were almost demonstration pieces, not a kata as such, but something to be shown before a public display of combat. So perhaps a trial by combat, perhaps just entertaining crowds and making some money. Swordsmen aren't always the most well respected of people. So we know a flourish is a solo form. It could be that the rest of these drills, because they don't have any real reference to anybody else, so it appears very one-sided. I suppose give you an example. One play, literally word for word: 2 double rounds forwards, 2 double round and as many backwards. 2 double round forwards with as many backward. A downright stroke voiding back the left foot, a back thrust voiding back the right foot, then set in the left foot with a quarter backwards. I could do that as a solo drill. I do them as solo drills. They're quite good. Just gets your body flowing and moving. I haven't done any for a while, obviously. So some people do interpret these things as just being kata, things that people do to train solo forms. Whereas there are other people, you know, a lot of the Montante stuff looks like it's meant to be done solo. So there's definitely stuff from the period that would fit with it being solo forms. However, there are a couple of other references. Within the document, it does say once or twice, when playing against a sprite enemy is one that he uses, or if your enemy does this. So I've very much interpreted the things that we've got going on in the manuscript as being, just checking I'm not actually bending my blade. No, it's doing fine. Sorry, back down here because I think up there I'm probably out of camera. I think they're meant as a paired drill. And that he's written one side down, because that's the important bit, because ultimately the person who was writing it down for somebody who knew what they were doing in terms of what the terms meant and what the techniques meant, and he understood the system. It's just making a record of that drill. This fits with it being a 16th century document that's copied from a earlier, significantly earlier piece written in more traditional medieval English, early modern, well, not even early modern, but not full on middle English. In terms of, you have in this period much more of what you can best be described as a master, not a master pupil or teacher pupil relationship, but a master apprentice. And if you look at how apprenticeships work, particularly in those periods, you've got a 7-year apprenticeship for most build structured things, from what I understand. And you start at the bottom and you clean and you tidy and you watch the old guys doing what they do. And then later on you're given basic tasks and they tell you what to do. And you just do it until you get good at it, and then they give you the next task. And there's no real discussion, there's no real, I suppose what we describe as a structured learning program. There probably is, in terms of you do this first and then you learn to do this and this leads into that sort of thing. But they're not, this master apprentice system is not really interested in necessarily you understanding the minute details of what you're doing. It's more interested in getting you to make sure that the thing that you're making is right and fits. Obviously in the 16th century, in the rise of Protestantism and the desire to communicate more and discuss more, and you know, the Renaissance prince and all this sort of stuff, we do move into much more into sort of a teacher-pupil role, and we start to see these Aristotelian discussions going on, which literally take place between a master and a pupil. Very common. Is it Arbo, 16th century dance master, where it is literally, the text is a discussion between a master and a student. Interestingly, he says you learn to sword fight to impress your mates, you learn to dance to impress the ladies. Side note, not really important, but we're not into that, we're into something else. So for me, these are, as I say, two-person drills, because of these references to what to do against an enemy, and a sprite enemy at that sometimes. So that's the basics of the manuscript. What else do you want to look at? Terminology. As I've said, a lot of the text is very, very common knowledge. as is did with that 2 double rounds forwards. Well, we all know what the word double means, and we all know what rounds are in concept. We all know what forwards means and backwards means and downright. You know, these are terms that we still use now. So this is day-to-day language, by and large. Which does make it quite difficult to interpret what the hell's going on, because there is no glossary. I've searched through quite a lot of medieval documents, and where you do find similar words and used in similar contexts, again, they don't actually tell you what they mean. So just focusing on make sure I've got this shape right. We're getting there though, it's beginning to take shape. So where to go next? Terms, that's where we're at, isn't it? It gets quite hard. Basically, there aren't a lot of terms used in the manuscript, which I find not just interesting, but really useful. Because I don't know what the words they're using are entirely, and I could sort them out. I mean, a quarter. When you look, quarters can be, well, proffer rate quarter and another void. So we've got a quarter and one void. They can be made at the head, they can be made at the leg, at the knee, low down by the ground, which I presume is the foot. They can be made with one hand, with both hands, with the left hand. So I suppose at that point, actually, what we can do is perhaps talk a little bit on sword. Actually, I think we'll stop there, just because I'm not sure my video is still recording. I've waffled, so I'll stop.